Her husband and his mistress thought they won, until she turned the tables. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 and I live in Denver, Colorado. For 8 years, I was married to a man I believed was my partner in everything, Daniel Carter. He's a corporate attorney, polished, ambitious, and always chasing the next big promotion. From the outside, people thought we were the perfect couple. I used to think the same. I work as an interior designer, and I love the life we built together. I took pride in making our house a home, planning our future, and being the person who stood by him no matter what. When Daniel decided to switch firms a few years ago, he called it the biggest move of his career. I picked up extra projects to help cover expenses and cut back on things I enjoyed so he wouldn't feel pressured. I cooked late dinners when he came home exhausted, handled bills, and kept everything steady. I trusted him completely. In my mind, our sacrifices were shared, and his success was our success. I didn't question the long hours or the late-night calls. I told myself that being married to someone with a demanding job meant being understanding. I thought he appreciated that. There were nights I stayed up waiting for him, only to get a short message saying he was swamped with paperwork. I would leave his plate covered on the counter and go to bed reminding myself that his effort now would pay off for both of us later. I believed in us that deeply. Even when friends hinted that he seemed distant or distracted, I brushed it off and defended him. I told them stress could change a person's tone, that his silence was just exhaustion. I never imagined there could be someone else. I remember sitting across from him at dinner one night, watching him scroll through his phone with half-hearted nods to whatever I was saying. I asked if something was wrong, and he said everything was fine, just pressure from work. He smiled the way he always did when he wanted me to stop worrying. I accepted it without pushing further. Looking back, that moment should have meant something, but I didn't let my mind go there. I thought love meant assuming the best. When we first got married, he used to bring me coffee in bed on Saturdays. We would cook breakfast together and talk about places we wanted to visit someday. Slowly, those mornings disappeared, replaced with emails, calls, and rushed exits. I held on to our early memories like proof that we were still the same couple, just busier. I told myself that all marriages change, and it was normal. I had no idea that while I was holding everything together, he was breaking everything we had. I didn't see the cracks, not because they weren't there, but because I trusted him enough not to look for them. I believed that what we had was stronger than distance, silence, or time. I didn't know yet that everything I believed in was about to be tested in the worst way. It started with little changes that didn't seem dangerous at first. Daniel began coming home even later than before. Some nights he wouldn't walk through the door until after midnight, and when I asked if everything was all right, he always had the same answer. It was work, deadlines, clients, paperwork. He said it with a tired smile, and I believed him because that was easier than doubting him. Then his phone became something new. He used to leave it on the kitchen counter or the nightstand without a second thought. Suddenly, it was always in his pocket or face down next to him. If it buzzed, he'd glance at it quickly and turn the screen away from me. Once, I tried to hand it to him when it rang in the other room, and he rushed over like something was on fire. He laughed it off and said a client's case details were sensitive. I didn't push back. I told myself lawyers deal with private information all the time. His tone changed too. He wasn't angry or cruel, just absent. Conversations turned short. He stopped asking about my day unless I brought it up first. If I told him something I was excited about, a new client, a design idea, he'd listen halfway, nodding while scrolling through emails. I tried not to take it personally. I thought he was tired, that he needed space, that I should be patient. I kept reminding myself of the pressure he always claimed to be under. Weekends grew quieter. He used to spend Saturdays fixing things around the house or running errands with me. Now he said he needed to catch up on contracts or prepare for meetings. He'd sit in his office with the door closed for hours. I brought him coffee or lunch sometimes, and he would thank me without looking away from his laptop. I convinced myself this was just a busy season. One evening, I suggested we take a short trip, just a weekend somewhere nearby to relax. He didn't even look up when he said it wasn't a good time. No discussion, no question, just a flat no. I went to bed that night with a tight feeling in my chest, but I swallowed it down. I didn't want to sound needy or dramatic. I thought supporting him meant staying quiet when things got hard. Friends asked if everything was okay with us. I said yes before they even finished the question. I told them he was dedicated to his job, that lawyers don't get real breaks. I repeated those lines so often they started sounding like the truth, even when something inside me knew better. The moment that cracked my denial came on an ordinary Tuesday. I walked past his office door to tell him dinner was ready. It was slightly open, and I heard him laugh softly, softer and warmer than he ever sounded with me lately. He said a name I'd never heard before, Sabrina, and his voice had a tone I hadn't heard in months. I froze outside the door, my hand on the frame, and waited for something, anything, that would tell me I was imagining it. Instead, he lowered his voice and said he missed her. My heart went completely still. In that second, every excuse I had made for him collapsed. I didn't walk in or confront him. I just stepped away quietly and realized everything I had ignored was finally staring me in the face. Hearing that name changed something in me. I didn't confront him that night or the next. I acted like nothing was wrong because I needed to be sure. I needed more than a single overheard moment to understand what I was up against. So I watched him differently, not as a wife hoping he was honest, but as someone trying to see what was really there. The first thing I noticed was how often he stepped outside to take calls. Before, he'd talk in the kitchen or his office without caring who heard him. Now, his voice dropped low whenever the phone rang, and he'd walk out to the patio or into the garage with the door closed behind him. I would pause whatever I was doing and listen to the muffled sounds just long enough to catch tones, pauses, soft laughter. Every time I heard that hint of warmth in his voice, I knew it was her. One afternoon, he left his briefcase in the living room when he went upstairs to change. His phone buzzed inside it. I didn't touch it, but I watched the screen light up with a notification. I only saw the first name, Sabrina. My stomach twisted, but I held myself still. I didn't want him to know I had seen it. I needed him to think I was still in the dark. I started paying attention to his schedule. He said he was working late more often, but the times didn't make sense. Some nights he'd come home looking fresh, not tired. He'd shower and change like he hadn't spent the whole day buried in files. Once, he came home with a new cologne scent I hadn't bought. When I asked about it, he said a coworker got it as a gift for the whole team. I smiled and pretended to believe him. I also noticed the way he reacted when I entered a room. If he was on his phone, he'd lock it or flip it over. If I asked a simple question, he'd act irritated, like I was interrupting something critical. I stopped trying to talk to him about dinner plans or weekend errands because I wanted him calm and careless, not cautious. I did some quiet checking on my own. I searched online for the law firm's staff and found her name, Sabrina Hayes, paralegal. She looked young, put together, the kind of woman who wanted to be noticed. Seeing her face made everything feel more real, but I didn't let myself react. I closed the page and went back to folding laundry like nothing had happened. At night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing while my thoughts ran in clear line. I didn't cry, not yet. Shock has a way of freezing everything before it shatters. I told myself I needed proof before I made a move. I didn't want confusion or emotion to ruin my judgment, so I kept observing quietly and carefully. I stopped asking where he was going or when he'd be home. I let him believe I was still the same trusting wife. I knew that if I stayed patient, he'd slip. Men like him always do when they think no one sees the. Once I knew her name and saw the signs clearly, I accepted that guessing wasn't enough. I needed proof, real evidence that couldn't be denied or twisted. I didn't want a confrontation based on suspicion. I wanted the truth in my hands before I made a single move. So I contacted a private investigator. It wasn't easy for me to do. I had never imagined hiring someone to follow my own husband, but my instincts told me I wasn't wrong. The investigator didn't ask many questions after I explained the situation. I gave him Daniel's schedule, the car he drove, and the name I had overheard. He nodded like it wasn't the first time he'd heard a story like mine. That alone made my heart sink, but I stayed calm and focused. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my family. I carried on with my routine at home, so Daniel wouldn't feel anything had shifted. The first few days were quiet. He acted as usual, coming home late, putting his phone face down, and pretending everything was ordinary. I kept my voice steady, cooked dinner, asked about his day, and pretended to believe every excuse he gave. Underneath it all, I was just waiting for the call. It came on the fourth day. The investigator said he had something to show me and asked to meet in person. When I sat across from him at a small coffee shop and saw the envelope on the table, my hands went cold. I didn't open it there. I waited until I was alone in my car. Then I pulled out the photos one by one. There they were, Daniel and Sabrina at a boutique hotel on the edge of the city. I didn't just see them walking in together. I saw him holding the door for her, carrying her bag, looking relaxed and unbothered. In another photo, they were sitting in the hotel restaurant, leaning close, smiling in a way he hadn't smiled at me in months. The last photo showed them leaving, his hand on the small of her back like it was the most natural thing in the world. My chest felt heavy, but I didn't cry right away. I sat in silence, staring at the dashboard, letting the reality settle in piece by piece. Everything I had hoped wasn't true was now printed in full color in my lap. The betrayal was no longer something I suspected. It was something I could touch. When I walked back into the house that evening, Daniel was already home, acting like any other night. He greeted me casually, kissed my cheek, and asked what I wanted for dinner. I looked at him and realized he had no idea his lies were now exposed. That moment could have broken me, but instead it hardened something inside. I didn't shout, accuse, or fall apart. I didn't tell him what I had seen. I spoke to him like nothing had changed because I knew that reacting too soon would give him control of the story. I wanted time to think, time to decide what came next. He believed he was safe, and I let him think that. That night, while he slept beside me, I lay awake with the photos hidden in my drawer and a new clarity forming in my mind. He had already made his move. Now it was my turn to plan mine. Truth. I just had to wait for the right moment, and I felt it coming. After seeing those photos, I realized I couldn't afford to act on anger alone. If I confronted him without a plan, he might twist everything, lie his way through it, or even try to leave me with nothing. That was when I remembered something important, something I had almost forgotten because I never imagined needing it. Before my father passed away, he set up a trust fund for me. At the time, Daniel knew about it, but he never asked questions because I never used the money. It was separate from our joint accounts, protected and legally mine. My father also insisted that when we bought our house, the deed should be in my name only. He said it was just a precaution, nothing personal against Daniel, but a way to make sure I always had security. I never thought that small detail would matter one day, but now it felt like the only stable ground I had. Daniel always behaved like everything belonged to both of us. He talked about the house like he helped pay for it, even though the down payment came from my inheritance. I never corrected him. I thought it didn't matter since we were married and planning a future together. But now, knowing what he was doing behind my back, those decisions from the past suddenly became my protection. I made an appointment with a lawyer without telling anyone. I chose someone recommended quietly through a client of mine, someone with no connection to Daniel's firm. When I sat down in her office and explained the situation, I didn't cry or break down. I handed her the photos and gave her the facts, the trust fund, the house deed, the years of financial contribution I made, and his growing distance. She asked questions carefully, and I answered everything honestly. When she finished reviewing the documents I brought, she looked at me and said something that changed my entire mindset. You're in a stronger position than he is. Much stronger. Hearing that didn't make the betrayal hurt less, but it gave me something I hadn't had in weeks: control. The lawyer told me that because the house was purchased in my name using non-marital funds, Daniel had no legal claim to it. The trust fund was protected completely. And if I could prove he spent money on the woman he was seeing, that would only work in my favor during a divorce. She didn't push me to file anything. She just laid out my options and told me to gather anything else that could support my case. She suggested I stay quiet, act normal, and let him think I was unaware while I prepared everything carefully. When I left her office, I didn't feel weak or unsure anymore. I felt steady. I went back home and greeted Daniel like any other day. He glanced at his phone when I walked in, probably thinking about her, and I smiled like nothing was wrong. He believed I was still in the dark, and I let him stay comfortable in that. From that moment on, I wasn't just hurt, I was planning. I knew exactly what I had, what he thought he could take, and how wrong he was going to be. Not long after I met with the lawyer, Daniel made his move. One evening after dinner, he sat across from me at the kitchen table with a serious look on his face. He said he'd been thinking about taking some space, and that maybe a trial separation would help him clear his head. He tried to sound thoughtful and calm, like this was something mature and reasonable. He didn't mention guilt or wrongdoing, just vague words about stress, confusion, and needing time alone. I knew exactly what he was planning. He wanted to ease out of the marriage without facing a fight. He thought I would cry, beg, or panic. He expected me to make it easy for him so he could run to Sabrina without getting his hands dirty. Instead of reacting the way he imagined, I lowered my eyes, took a quiet breath, and asked if he was sure. I kept my voice soft, shaky even, like I was struggling to understand. He looked relieved, maybe even proud of himself, as if handling this gently made him honorable. He told me it was temporary, and that he didn't want things to get messy. He said I could stay in the house for now, and he would go stay somewhere close by, while we figured things out. I nodded slowly, pretending to be hurt and blindsided. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask where he would stay. I just whispered, "If that's what you need, I want to support you." He seemed almost surprised I wasn't fighting him. Maybe he thought I was too fragile to push back. He put a hand on mine and said he hoped we could handle it like adults. I forced a tear into my voice and told him I loved him and hoped he'd come back when he was ready. He squeezed my fingers and looked guilty for half a second, then stood up and said he'd pack a few things in the morning. The minute he went upstairs, the mask dropped. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt calm. I already knew this was his way of leaving without admitting the truth. He wanted freedom without consequences, and he assumed he still had control of everything. He had no idea how wrong he was. Over the next couple of days, I played the part he expected, a quiet, confused wife trying to accept something painful. I didn't call friends or make a scene. I didn't ask where he was staying. I acted too stunned to do anything but agree. Meanwhile, behind his back, I made sure all our joint accounts had no surprises. I moved my personal savings into the trust account. I closed the credit card he used most often, claiming there was fraud activity. I changed the online banking access and put alerts on every remaining account so nothing went unnoticed. Daniel packed a suitcase and said he'd come by to talk things through in a few days. I gave him a weak smile and told him I'd be waiting. As he walked out the door, I watched him leave with that quiet confidence cheaters get when they think everything is going according to their plan. But he wasn't the only one planning anymore. I let him walk away believing he was ahead. I let him think I was lost without him. He didn't realize the separation he wanted was the very thing that would make it easier for me to finish what I'd started. After he moved out, Daniel's behavior shifted in a way that made everything clearer. He stopped pretending to be confused or overwhelmed. The careful tone, the fake sadness, it all faded. He spoke to me like someone who had already decided the ending and was just waiting for me to accept it. He didn't know I was already ahead of him. He started stopping by the house more often, not to check on me, but to look around like he was sizing it up. He'd make comments that sounded casual on the surface, but carried a message underneath. One day, he stood in the living room and said, "Once things settle, maybe it'll make more sense for me to come back here full time. I don't want to be bouncing around forever." I nodded slowly and didn't ask who me included. I knew he meant Sabrina too, even if he didn't say her name. Another time, he mentioned that the guest room would work fine for a while, and that maybe some changes could be made around the house, when things are official. He talked about replacing furniture, clearing closets, rearranging spaces. He wasn't suggesting, he was assuming. In his mind, I was already halfway out the door. He also tested boundaries with money. He asked if I had paid the mortgage and utilities on time, talking like it was a shared responsibility. I pretended to be unsure and said I was trying to manage everything while dealing with the separation. He offered to take over handling things soon, acting like the house belonged to both of us, and he was stepping up to help. He had no idea he had no legal right to any part of it. His confidence became even more obvious during one visit when he slipped and said, "It'll be easier when we're both here instead of maintaining two places." He caught himself and tried to smooth over the wording, but I didn't react. I just stared at my tea and let silence carry the moment. The more I said nothing, the bolder he became. From the way he talked, it was clear he believed I would eventually leave or give up my claim. He imagined that once he introduced the idea gently enough, I'd step aside, hand over the house, and disappear while he and Sabrina took over the life I built. He thought he could push me out mentally first, then physically. I didn't fight him. I didn't question him. I didn't raise my voice or show anger. I listened, nodded, and let him believe I was too heartbroken and financially insecure to do anything but wait for his decision. I let him think I was the one running out of options. What he couldn't see was how calm I truly was. Every arrogant assumption he made only confirmed I was doing the right thing by staying quiet. He thought silence meant weakness. He didn't understand it was the last thing he should have ignored. The more he talked about sorting things out, the more certain I became that. When I felt everything was in place, I told Daniel we should sit down and talk like adults about the next steps. I said I wanted to make the separation official and avoid any arguing. He liked the sound of that. He probably thought I was finally accepting what he wanted. When I suggested he bring Sabrina, so everyone was on the same page, he didn't hesitate. That told me everything about how sure he was that he'd already won. I set the meeting at the house, the same place he once planned to take over with. I chose the dining room table, cleared it, and set out 3 glasses of water. When he walked in with Sabrina, she looked confident, like she was stepping into a space she already owned. She glanced around at the house with interest, not respect. Daniel didn't bother hiding his comfort. He acted like he was returning to something that just needed rearranging. They sat down across from me. I kept my voice calm and thanked them both for coming. Before either of them could start talking, my lawyer walked in from the hallway carrying a folder. Daniel's face changed instantly. He wasn't expecting another person, especially not someone on my side. Sabrina looked at him, confused, then looked back at me like she was trying to understand what was happening. My lawyer sat next to me, opened the folder, and placed several documents neatly on the table. She spoke clearly and simply. She explained that the house was bought with funds from my inheritance and was in my name only. She pointed out that Daniel had no legal ownership or claim to the property. She also mentioned that any attempt to use it as part of a separation agreement would not hold in court. Daniel tried to interrupt, but she didn't stop. She went on to confirm that my trust fund was legally protected and untouchable. She stated that any marital assets would be reviewed, and any funds spent outside the marriage, including on another person, could be taken into account if I chose to file for divorce. Sabrina's expression changed slowly, from smug to startled. She looked at Daniel like she was waiting for him to fix it, but he had no words ready. He kept glancing at the documents, then back at me, then at the lawyer. The confidence he had been walking around with started to disappear right in front of me. I didn't raise my voice or gloat. I didn't accuse or argue. I simply let the facts land one by one. The lawyer slid copies of the deed and trust details across the table and told them both that any further assumptions about the house or my finances were not only incorrect but legally irrelevant. For the first time since I discovered the affair, I watched Daniel struggle for control. He tried to act calm, but his jaw was tight and his hands were clenched. He said we didn't need lawyers involved yet. I stayed quiet and let my lawyer answer for me. She told him that everything going forward would be handled properly and documented. Sabrina didn't speak after that. She sat very still, her confidence gone. She finally understood she wasn't stepping into my place. She was stepping into a situation she didn't control. And that was exactly what I wanted. The tables would turn exactly when I wanted them to. Once the shock settled in the room, I knew it was time to finish what I started. I looked at Daniel directly and told him I was filing for divorce. I didn't raise my voice or show emotion. I said it clearly and without hesitation. Then I stated the grounds: adultery. His eyes widened, and he opened his mouth like he might deny it, but he knew there was no point. The evidence was already in my possession, and he didn't know how much I had shared with my lawyer. Before he could speak, my lawyer placed another set of documents on the table. These weren't just about the house or the trust. They showed bank statements, credit card charges, and transactions that didn't belong to our life together. Hotel stays, dinners, gifts, things he paid for while he was still living with me. Money from joint accounts being used on her. Every line was printed, highlighted, and dated. He tried to explain, but his voice cracked. He said some of those expenses were work-related. My lawyer didn't argue. She only pointed out that any spending tied to another woman during the marriage could be used against him legally. She also said that if the court saw proof of that behavior, it could affect division of assets, alimony decisions, and even professional reputation. Daniel went silent. Sabrina turned her head toward him, and I saw hesitation in her eyes for the first time. She hadn't expected to be part of anything that carried consequences. She sat up straighter, as if separating herself from him without moving her chair. Daniel looked at her like she might defend him, but she didn't speak. I told him calmly that the divorce filing would include the adultery claim and the financial misuse. I said everything would be handled through proper legal channels, not private talks or quiet agreements. He stopped pretending to be in control. I could see fear settling in as the real situation formed in his head. What made it worse for him was something he clearly never considered. Sabrina wasn't there to rescue him. She didn't offer to help, didn't say a word about standing by him. She just sat there, staring at the paperwork that could drag both their names into a mess she wanted no part of. Her expression made it obvious she hadn't planned to take care of him if things got difficult. He finally spoke, asking if we could discuss things privately, but I didn't give him that chance. I told him everything would go through my lawyer from now on, and that I wouldn't be speaking to him alone about anything related to the divorce. His voice dropped, and I saw the panic he'd been hiding behind arrogance. He glanced at Sabrina again, maybe expecting support, but she barely looked at him. She didn't argue with me. She didn't threaten me. She didn't say his name. Her silence told him exactly what he hadn't realized until that moment. Whatever future he imagined with her was built on the idea that I would quietly walk away and leave him everything. Now he knew I wouldn't. When everything was finally processed through the legal system, the results were exactly what I had prepared for. The house stayed in my name without any challenge because it had always legally belonged to me. The trust fund and my savings were protected, and he had no claim over them. The court looked at the proof of his spending on Sabrina and the adultery, which worked in my favor. I didn't lose anything. I kept my home, my finances, and my peace. Daniel walked in thinking he could divide everything and walk away with comfort, but he left with nothing that mattered. The accounts were separated, and the assets were assigned with clear lines. I remained exactly where I had always been, secure and stable. I did not have to move, scramble, or beg. I stayed in my house while he faced what came next. Sabrina didn't stay long once the truth became real. When she understood that Daniel had no access to anything valuable, she started pulling away. There were no more hotel meetings, no secret plans, no smiles hidden behind lies. She didn't want a man with legal trouble, no house, and no money. She left quietly, without a word to me. She just disappeared from his life the same way she entered mine, from the shadows. Daniel moved into a small apartment he could barely afford. He had to handle his own bills and his own mess without anyone covering. He no longer had the comfort he assumed he would land on. Friends he had bragged to before stopped checking it. His pride went with his lifestyle. I didn't need to see it to know it, I heard enough from his attempts to reach out, which I ignored. I didn't waste time watching his life fall apart. I focused on mine. I stayed calm, steady, and private. There was no need for revenge beyond what was already done by the truth and the law. I lived in my own house, continued my routines, met with my lawyer only when needed, and let the dust settle without chaos. There were no dramatic speeches, no confrontations, and no shouting matches. I walked away with what was already mine and protected everything he thought he could take. He faced consequences on his own, without support from the woman he risked everything for. He learned too late that security only feels permanent when you believe no one sees what you are doing. I didn't go backward or stay stuck in anger. I moved forward with control over my choices and my future. The silence after everything ended wasn't empty, it was relief. No pretending, no secrets, no arguments over things he never owned. In the end, I didn't just survive what he tried to do. I stayed standing while his plans collapsed around him. What he thought would break me only cleared the way for me to live without him, without fear, and without losing a single thing I earned or inherited. I walked away stronger, and he was left alone with the outcome he created. And now he knew she wouldn't carry him through the fallout.